Meg Southwell, New South Wales State Coordinator. Now, Meg served in the Australian Army, and we've had questions about Veterans Affairs. Unfortunately, we had a detailed letter written to us, which we are unable to read it tonight. But I'll now invite Meg to introduce herself, give a quick rundown on her service, period of service, where she served, things like that, and then explain her experience with DVA, just to give the non-military people out there, although even the military ones who have not had to suffer the indignity of this organisation, but just talk through it. And these are people who have signed on the dotted line. And every soldier, sailor and airman, regardless of where they serve, they all took that oath. They signed that document to say, I will serve in the Defence Force. Implicit in that contract is that they might die for you. That's something very special. All right, so Meg, welcome to the program. Please introduce yourselves, and I'll just let you run. You just tell the people what they need to understand about DVA, what it's like being a veteran on the receiving end of this, and if you've got any ideas at the end, what sort of things need to be done to rectify the situation. Where you go.
Sure. Thanks very much, Ricardo. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me on tonight. Really appreciate it. Okay, so I joined the Army back when I was a young 17-year-old teenager, and I did almost 20 years in total across the reserve and in the regular forces. My injuries don't stem from wartime service. I actually hurt myself just in the line of work, playing football, rugby, falling off things, all that sort of stuff. I did undergo some very extensive abdominal surgery at one point in my life, and that was the point for me that turned me into a broken soldier. I just never really recovered from that, and that was when I actually started going through the whole DVA process of having all of my injuries and things like that registered with DVA and recognised. Now, while you're still in the military, you get free medical health and cover, dental, all that sort of stuff. So whilst you're still serving, it's not so much an issue because you can just go to the doctor and, get sorted out for it. My issues sort of started to hit home after I'd left the Defence Force, and then trying to access the medical cover that they say is there for you and finding out that it's not. So that's my story. I have another story, and that's of my partner. He's actually done more than 20 years in the military. He has injuries from active service, and he didn't do anything about DVA while he was in, and he's done all of his stuff post-service, and it took him 6 months to go from absolutely nothing to receiving his entitlements and having, medical care for the rest of his life. So there's my story pre all of the investigations into the DVA system, and then my partners on the other side of that after they've gone through their Royal Commission. So it has changed. You'd have to be fair and say some of it's for the better, but there's that gap of people like me that sort of fall into the middle where we're not quite broken enough to have full medical service, and then they're going to stingy on the services that they've already said you've got. So that's it in a nutshell.
Thanks, Meg. It's an interesting area, DVA. Just so you're aware, folks, I'm not sure what it's like now, but when I was in, if you got an injury, you hid the injury, because if you didn't hide the injury, you might get downgraded medically. If you get downgraded medically, then, you may not be able to continue your work. So it was not unusual for soldiers to conceal injuries. For example, I had 2 collapsed transverse arches, chondromalacia patella on both knees, spondylolisthesis of L5 and S1 in the spine, and a sublux dislocation of my right shoulder from parachuting. I didn't bother telling anybody about it because you don't want to get downgraded, so you just push through. Now, people say, well, that's stupid, you should have. Well, people that say they don't understand the psychology of a soldier and what's required to be a soldier, you shut up and get on with the job. But having said that, then you should be able to look after them as well. So one of the A1 approach to this, to make most of the claims as quick and as easy as Meg's partner, and not like hers, which were just shocking, in terms of the time delay and then the constant badgering that maybe that wasn't as she said. A1 will be looking at very, very differently. As I said, DVA is going to come under Department of Defence so they can see the cost to the people as well as to the individuals of their imbecilic decisions. Second point, those injured in service should be able to remain in service and continue to serve productively, because there's any number of jobs for well-trained soldiers. And when I was in the regiment, a long time ago now, one of the top soldiers had a motorcycle accident going home from work and lost his leg below the knee. Now, I was an adjutant at the time, and so I was closely involved in this and watching it. I went out to the hospital the night of the accident to see if he was all right. There was a bunch of warrant officers there, his mates looking after him. So he was fine. We were involved in it, and we had a god almighty battle trying to keep this guy in the system, keep him in SAS, and keep him once he recovered, because this guy's a free faller. Years of experience. The experience would take a lot of money to replace. Looking for a role for this guy to stay within the regiment. They have very strict restrictions on who can stay in terms of their fitness. That's why I lied about all my injuries. But those soldiers have a lot to give, a lot to contribute. And eventually he actually did get a job as a freefall instructor at the parachute training school, but it took more effort than it should have. This individual is highly trained, highly specialised, and still capable of contributing a lot to the system. And so just ditching these people because they're broken is not only stupid economically and professionally, it also damages the individual, because having given everything, they're kicked to the curb and they're lost, which is just insane. So we're going to make sure that those that wish to serve on can do so, and there'll be special categories of disabilities that allow them to move on, even in combat command positions. For example, the United States has a much better approach than us. And there's a celebrated brigadier, there's a brigade commander, combat commander, and he was missing his leg. And they figured, well, most of what this guy has to do doesn't require running, dodging, and jumping. And yet they had years and years and years of experience, and so he did. He continued to serve with distinction, with one of his legs missing. And going back to the famous Douglas Tin Legs Barter, for those who don't know, it's a book called Reach for the Sky. We read it in first form, that's year 7, when I was a little boy. And it was a story about a World War II hurricane pilot who smashed up his legs, lost both legs, and had his tin legs put on, and he continued to fly, and with distinction, in the Battle of Britain against the Luftwaffe. And so I've seen the names of the people on the DVA board some years ago, and wasn't surprised they weren't getting giving good service to the people. I don't know who's on the board now, but it doesn't much matter. The people on the board will be the ones that have been through the process, not poodle faking senior officers that are looking for a nice stipend after they retire, because that's basically what happens. And so it's going to be there to look after the vets. Our vets will be looked after properly. I visited one some time ago as a result of post-traumatic stress disorder. The psychiatric profession pumped him full of drugs, dismissed all his complaints. He tried his best to communicate. He gave me a lot of paperwork on what was involved and what had been happening. And the psychiatrists, these people are insane and brutal in their disregard of the soldiers. So that's not going to happen anymore. We will have our own hospitals with medical staff looking after our people. I remember an interesting story when I was a young lieutenant, and PTSD started coming up as an issue. And I asked one of the old warrant officers, an ex-Vietnam vet, and I said, "Did you have this at this sort of level when you were coming back from Vietnam?" And he said, "No, sir." I said, "Why is that?" And he said, "Because we got drunk in the mess together to get the shit off our liver." Something as simple as that, to keep these people employed within a system that supports and loves them and looks after them, as opposed to kicking them to the curve, makes a big difference. Because it takes a lot to get through that. Some don't get affected at all, and some are profoundly affected. There's no judgment to that. It's just the way life is. But the critical importance of keeping these people within their family cannot be overstated. But the system that we have now is completely unfeeling and insensitive to the needs of the individuals. Oh, just wait another 2-3 months. And this is to people who can't make it through the next 2-3 days without having an episode. So to all the vets out there, I know it's cold comfort, but when we get in, and we will, we're fixing this mess up and making sure that those who have signed that dotted line, who have committed to die for this country, are respected just for that action, if nothing else. Okay, let's now go on to the Q&A, please. Sarah, if you're there, or Meg, are you doing